Well, welcome to this tutorial on morals and morality. So this is an area which is subject to some potential exam questions. Now, if you have not yet studied your IG1 exam technique section, please stop, go study that first before getting into this. You need to know how this unit is assessed before you study the unit, because that will help you study more effectively. Let's get into the topic of morality. You can be asked a variety of different exam questions along the lines of, what are the moral arguments in favor of improving health and safety in this organization? Or comment on the organization's health and safety morals or the manager's morals and so on. Remember, with all of these exam questions, if it's still a scenario-based exam when you're doing your exam, and at the moment it is a scenario-based exam, remember that all of your answers must be specific to the scenario. Do not copy any of the generic information that I'm about to present to you. Always apply this generic information to your exam scenario. So with that in mind, what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about the moral consequences. And what we mean by that is, what are the bad things that can happen to workers and their families and their colleagues if there is a health and safety incident? So firstly, what are the consequences of poor health and safety management? First thing. Second thing, we're going to talk about the ethical rules, the moral rules which employers are expected to abide by. So what are the ways in which a responsible, ethical, moral employer should behave? How should they behave? And what does society expect from businesses and organizations? Thirdly, and crucially, and this is probably the area with the most exam questions on this, is how can you tell what an organization's health and safety morals are? Right, so if you were to look at an organization, how do you know if they have good morals or bad morals? Right, so let's get stuck into it. First topic is, what are the moral consequences? What bad things can happen? So let's take a look at this slide here, and you can see there's a whole list of things here, and many of them are medical related. So firstly, if there's a health and safety incident, there's going to be pain. There's going to be suffering of some kind, whether it's just a small cut, a small bruise, whether it's a broken bone or a serious life-changing injury or even a death. There is going to be pain and suffering. Now, we've talked about injuries, but let's not forget the other types of health and safety incidents. What about health conditions? What if someone was exposed to too much wood dust or asbestos dust? What if they're exposed to some kind of liquid which causes rashes, like a chemical liquid which causes a rash or a skin burn or an irritation? So we've also got the health effects too. Those health effects cause pain and suffering, and those health effects cause various types of injuries, and sometimes they can be life-changing injuries, life-changing diseases. So diseases like asthma and cancer, and might not even be chemical related. It could be, say, too much noise. Well, that would cause deafness. It could be too much vibration in the hands, and that would cause vibration, white finger, in your hands. So there's all these kinds of diseases as well as just the injuries. Now, moving on from the immediate and long-term health effects and injuries, you then get into things like the impact on the person's life. So you may have, for example, their inability to enjoy their life. They might be disabled in a wheelchair, which means they might not be able to play sport. They may have suffered a serious injury to their shoulder or arm, which means they can't play with their children the same way they used to. Maybe they can't play an instrument anymore, which affects the quality of their life. Perhaps they're so badly injured they have to spend a lot of time at home. They're unable to travel, they're unable to go out as easily, which means they're more isolated. They can't socialize, they can't spend time with friends or with family. Maybe their injury requires a lot of ongoing medical treatment, a lot of rehabilitation, physiotherapy and so on, which means they're going to spend a lot of time traveling back and forth to medical appointments, and again, possibly not spend as much time with their friends and family. All of this has costs as well. That medical treatment might not be insured. They may have to pay money privately to get the medical treatment that they need. And if they're not working because they have been injured, then they are affected financially as well. So they might not be able to pay for food. pay their rent, pay their mortgage for their house where they live. They might not be able to pay for all of the luxuries that you might want in life. So maybe their children play football on a weekend. That costs money a lot of the time, doesn't it? You've got to pay for football club, membership fees, football equipment. Right? And maybe they won't be able to afford those things. Music lessons and days out, fun days, and so on. So there's a big financial impact, which also causes a loss of quality of life, not just for the injured person, but for their wider family as well. With that loss of quality of life, what we often see is a loss of self-esteem. That loss of enjoyment leads to mental health issues. People who have been seriously injured at work have a much higher risk of suicide. They are not as happy, they are not as fulfilled most of the time. If you're watching this and you're a NEBOSH student, did you know that you have a ton of resources on the Compassa website which you can use? Many of them are very, very cheap. You've got our YouTube section here, loads of free advice here, but if you want some study books, if you want exam technique documents, exam technique guides, instructions on how to do your NG2 or IG2 practical project, you can download those at some very, very reasonable prices from our website. And if you wanted hands-on tutor support with full access to all of our tutorials, guides, me and my colleagues at the tips of your fingers, consider signing up for our NEBOSH Rescue package. You'll get access to our full course and tutor support at a heavily discounted rate. And, well, frankly, you'll struggle to find pass rates that are as consistently high anywhere else. Let's get back to the advice. Now, you would think that the employer would support somebody through this difficult time, but actually what employers tend to do is they tend to fire the workers who are unable to work. You see, even if the employer is the one who caused the injury, an employer isn't going to pay somebody to just stay at home crippled or disabled until the end of their career. No, an employer is going to let that person go and will fire them on the grounds of capability. You are incapable of doing the job, therefore you are fired. Now that's in a serious situation, but a lot of injuries are not that serious, thankfully. A lot of injuries might only cause a short-term sickness absence. But even a short-term sickness absence could cause all of these bad things. A short-term sickness absence of, say, a month. Let's say you injure your back and you are off work for a month. Well, what if your employer doesn't pay you for a month? Can you afford to go a month without any money? Will your landlord who rents you your house or your apartment, will they accept that you don't pay your rent this month? Now, if you do not have savings, even the short-term absences from work without money can cause great financial difficulty over the long term because you're trying to catch up. Maybe you get yourself into debt and you're trying to catch back. So that's workers and their families. What about other people though? What about their colleagues? Now imagine if there's a serious incident. Imagine that something falls from a crane and lands on somebody, maybe killing them or maybe just very, very badly hurting them. Maybe there's blood on the floor and there are screams and moans, and let's imagine that a load of people saw what happened. There's going to be shock, horror, and potentially some mental health issues for those workers as well. Those workers will come back to work, they will see that equipment, and they will have a flashback in their mind of what happened every single day. I once worked for a business that had a fatality. They had a fatality long after I had left there, and I will tell you the full story at some point in this course. But the fatality was a forklift ran over somebody outside the canteen. So it was break time, there were lots of people near the canteen, some people were outside in the smoking shelter smoking cigarettes, and then somebody crossed the road and the forklift ran right over them. And to be clear, it wasn't actually the forklift driver's fault. But it doesn't matter whose fault it was. Right now, lots of people saw what happened. They saw the scene after it happened. It was a very horrible scene to see. There was lots of blood, lots of mess, and everybody who went to the canteen after that, who witnessed the incident, everybody went to that smoking shelter, they stood there, and that's the place where that accident happened. They could see it in their eyes. And the result of that for the business was there was a financial impact, and we're going to talk about the financial impact in another tutorial, but the financial impact is a lot of people left the business because they did not want to go to that canteen and see and be reminded of what had happened. So enough of me talking. Let's do a short activity. What I would like you to do is drag and drop these consequences and put them into the correct category. Okay, very good. Hopefully you've sorted those out into medical, quality of life, and financial. That's not going to be an exam question, by the way. That's just to check that you have correctly understood the wide variety of different consequences to workers, their families, and their colleagues. Now let's talk about morality for a moment here. The moral arguments for good standards of health and safety. What are the moral rules, the ethical code of conduct, if you like? How should a business behave? Now, this is an area where we do occasionally get the odd exam question. These are arguments that might help you answer a question here or there. Broadly speaking, we all have a responsibility to ensure that none of those bad things happen because of us. We have, and I say we, that means me as an individual, but also the business, the organization, we have a moral duty to prevent harm. Harm which could be caused by our actions or our failure to act. And actually, it's our failure to do the right thing. It's our failure to act on what we know to be unsafe. That is what often causes the harm. Essentially, we are responsible for the consequences of our actions or our inactions. And that applies to health and safety and a whole load of other things as well. Ultimately, and here I'm going to get a little bit religious, and I don't know what religion you are from, but all of the major religions, as far as I know, whether that's Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Shintoism or Sikhism, all religions perceive human beings to be precious, to be sacred. The Holy Bible says man was made in the image of God, which basically means that each and every human life is precious. We are all equal in the eyes of God. Now, you might not be religious, and that's absolutely okay as far as I'm concerned, but still in our society, we still have this moral rule that every single person, no matter who they are, man, woman, old, young, disabled, fully abled, clever, not so clever, doesn't matter who you are, we are all precious in the eyes of God. And therefore, we all have a duty to protect ourselves, because we are precious too, and we have a duty to protect our colleagues around us. And that applies to organizations as well. The workers are precious and made in the image of God. And so employers are expected to follow what we call the golden rule. And again, the golden rule is a religious rule which we find in many of the world's major religions. And in Christianity, it is love thy neighbor as thyself. We also say something like, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So there's this kind of contractual idea where we all should treat people the way we would like to be treated. Now, we do not wish to be treated in a way which makes us unsafe or unhealthy. We don't wish an employer to take unnecessary risks with our health and safety. And therefore that puts on us an obligation, a moral obligation to do the same thing in return. We, as an employer, an organization, we must treat the workers in the way that we, the manager, would like to be treated if we were the worker. As far as society's expectations, so society out there in the world, the families of workers, the customers and so on, they expect certain standards of behavior from businesses and organizations. And one of those is that we must not sacrifice safety for profit. Now, don't get me wrong, profit is important. Cost, money, all of that matters. If a business is not making a profit, then there are no jobs. And if there are no jobs, you can't eat. So we have to make a profit. But we should not pursue profit at all costs. No, we must treat our customers fairly, we must do a good job, act in an environmentally sustainable way as much as we can, and we must not sacrifice the health, safety and well-being of the workers in the reckless pursuit of profit. That's what society expects. Society expects us to value the health and safety of workers. So those are some of the generic moral arguments. If we were to summarize then some of the moral expectations upon us, firstly, each and every person is individually responsible for the consequences of their decisions and their actions. So we're all responsible in our way. Here's a provocative point. If your employer is not taking health and safety very seriously and people are at risk, then obviously they're responsible for that, But you might also be responsible if you are failing to speak to your employer to raise the issue. If you are failing to educate them or try to educate them, then that means that you are partly responsible too. You see too many people just turn a blind eye, say, oh, the boss doesn't care, the boss is difficult, the boss always works really, really hard. And it's like, okay, you have given up, my friend. You have given up. You've stopped talking to the boss. You've stopped asking questions, challenging. Politely, of course, don't get yourself fired, so do it diplomatically, but you have a responsibility to try to do what you can, what's within your power, to raise the health and safety standards. You could also just talk to your colleagues and just say, okay, I know things are not very safe, but we can make the decision to do things as safely as we can. Another general idea, general moral argument, is that workers should be able to go home in the same condition they were in when they got to work. So if you've got 10 fingers when you get to work, you should go home with 10 fingers still attached. If you get to work with your lungs in good condition, you should be able to go home with your lungs still in the same condition. We should also take greater care of those who are more vulnerable. Okay, so let's say you have a disabled person. Let's say you've got someone who's blind or someone who can't hear. Well, they are more at risk, aren't they? They're more at risk of being hit by a vehicle or not seeing or hearing something approaching. So we have a moral responsibility to look after the vulnerable people in our workplace. That could be young people, disabled people, older people. That could be pregnant women, because the baby that they are carrying is also very vulnerable. And it could also be untrained people, uneducated people, inexperienced people, people who are in some way at greater risk due to some characteristic. We owe them a greater responsibility. Who else do we owe a greater moral duty of care to? Well, also members of the public. Members of the public don't understand your hazards and risks. Let's say they come onto your site, they don't know what's going on, they don't understand the hazards. We owe them a duty of care. What about a child who comes onto your site? Let's say you work in a shop. Let's say there's a child who starts to play with the escalator. And so you must assume that escalators are going to be played with by children who are curious. And that means we have a duty of care to protect and guard that escalator far more than if we were just working with adults who are maybe less curious and more careful. We must assume a child is going to put their feet and fingers in places they don't belong. So we have to guard that escalator even more. Why? Because we have a greater duty of care to children than we do to the grown-ups. Because the children are less capable of keeping themselves safe. So after all of that, how do we know if an organization cares? And this is one of the main exam questions on this point. Like, what are the organization's health and safety morals, and how do you know? How do you know? So you might be asked to comment on the morals and then to support your comment based on what's going on in the scenario. So you have to be able to see whether an organization cares about safety. Do they care about safety? Do they care about profit? Do they care for the vulnerable people, or do they not care at all? So you have to be able to know these things. And then you also have to explain, how do you know these things? Well, let me tell you, how do you know? You can tell from their actions. You could tell whether an employer cares from their actions. So what kinds of things do we expect a good employer to do? Well, we expect them to manage health and safety. And here are some examples of things that a good ethical employer will do. So firstly, they will do risk assessments. They will risk assess things before tasks and equipment start. They won't just buy the equipment, start using it, endanger all the users, and then do the risk assessment later. No, if you care about health and safety, you will risk assess it before you use the equipment. And then you will put all of the necessary precautions in place before they use the equipment. You care enough to think about it before you use it. You will also have a safe system of work in place before it gets used. A good employer will invest in health and safety. They will spend money, they will spend time, they will invest their workers' time into training and briefings. They will not sacrifice health and safety in the pursuit of profit. They will not try to cut costs to make a bit of extra profit where that cost cutting increases the risk in other ways. So a good employer will not provide cheap, inadequate PPE to their workers. No, they will invest in high quality personal protective equipment. They will invest in extraction systems. If an extraction system is better to suck away dusts from the environment. They will invest in high quality chairs in a call center, in a financial services office, for example. They will invest in better quality chairs which can be more easily adjusted. Employers will do lots of things to manage the risks of health and safety incidents. They will do inspections. They will actively monitor and try to keep hazards under control on a day-to-day basis. They'll do inspections and they will check that the process and the work is safe. You can also tell if an organization cares if they actually have very few accidents and very few near misses or very little ill health. Now, I don't mean very little reporting. That's a different thing. You can have lots of accidents which are not reported, but if they are genuinely very few accidents, or the accidents are going down because things are getting safer and safer, that is a sign that the organization cares enough to try to make things better. An organization with good health and safety morals will visibly care about its employees and its contractors. When I say visibly, I mean you can see them doing things. You can see them asking about safety. You can see them talking about health and safety. You can see them challenging unsafe situations, making efforts. So the managers, the bosses, will be out there doing health and safety things. And they won't just be interested in the workers, but they'll be interested in other people too, like contractors, members of the public, customers, even a trespasser, someone who shouldn't be on the site. They will care about that person's safety. What you'll see in an ethical workplace is that the equipment is safe. The equipment is maintained, it's well designed, it's in good condition, it's better quality equipment, or the best quality the organization can afford. Ultimately, you will see the workplace is safe. And also the morals, let's not forget another thing, is that the organization's morals are not just the management and the directors, it's also the workers themselves. We'll talk about culture later in the course, but what if you had a workplace where the workers didn't care? Well, that says something about the organization's culture and morals, doesn't it? So again, in your scenarios, make sure you look for evidence that workers care, workers are reporting things, workers are challenging things, workers are helping each other. Yeah? Or is it the opposite? Workers are just turning a blind eye, they're not reporting, they're giving up, they're blaming each other. All these things say something about the organization's morals. Enough of me talking, let's do some exercises now. And here, what I've got here are 2 case studies. What I would like you to do is read the case study and answer the question. Okay, fantastic. So those are very, very small case studies. Just imagine you have an exam, you will have a much larger case study, maybe 1 or 2 pages, and you'll have to write a much longer answer. Finally, let's do a drag and drop exercise and sort out the signs of good health and safety morals from the signs of bad health and safety morals. There we are, that concludes that tutorial on morality. Please make sure you take the time to go through all of your written materials, click on any other exercises, quizzes, insights, and I will see you, my friend, in the next one.